Welcome back to another video in the preseason series. Today I'm going to be sharing my top 5 general tips for succeeding in fantasy football. At number 5, it's the idea of building team value early on. Usually this is done by chasing some of the most popular bandwagons. So if a player does consistently well for the first couple of weeks, a huge number of people will be transferring him in. The early part of the season is when there are the most active users, so price changes happen quicker than they do later on in the season, making the first couple of weeks the best time to catch the price rises and build team value. Later on in the season, you can be a bit more selective about how you use your transfers and maybe go for more differential choices, but early on, I'd definitely recommend sticking with the crowd, covering those points from the bandwagon players and building team value in the process. Tip number 4 is taking advantage of the early wildcard. This follows on from the previous tip in that the early part of the season is when there are the most active users, and an early wildcard, usually played around game week 4, gives you the opportunity to essentially jump on as many bandwagons as you want without taking hits. So you can bring in the entire template team that emerges. This also means that you only need to look at the first 3 game weeks when selecting your initial squad, so you can go for the safe options, the players you know are definite starters from the teams that have the best fixtures in those first 3 game weeks, and avoid taking any unnecessary risks. Tip number 3 is quite an obvious one, but still very important, and it's to use the chips in double game weeks. If you're new to FPL and you haven't heard of the term before, a double game week is basically what happens when fixtures get stacked up towards the end of the season. Certain teams advance in the various cup competitions, and this means that some games need to be rescheduled, and often the only time to reschedule them is midweek within an already existing game week. So we get a situation where some teams play twice within a single game week. So therefore, if you use your chips in a double game week, your players will have double the amount of games to earn points, making your chips even more useful. At number 2, it's an often overlooked idea, which is to select safe captain choices. By this, I mean the captain choices that are the most popular amongst the teams that are ranked similar to your team. So if you're in the top 10k, and the majority of people in the top 10k are captaining Aguero, the safest thing to do is to also captain Aguero. I've found that it's best to find differentials within the rest of your team, and let your captain picks always be as safe as possible. Obviously that is just one strategy, and there are many other ways of playing the game, but that's what's worked for me. And my number 1 tip to succeed at fantasy football is to make transfers as late as possible. Now, I mentioned earlier on the idea of catching price rises early on in the season, and to do that you will need to sometimes make early transfers. But as the season progresses, you want to get into the habit of making your transfers as late as possible. That way you can hang on until after the press conferences to ensure that the player you're bringing in is definitely fit and available to play. And it also means that you can be flexible with that transfer if need be. So if it turns out that one of your other players picks up a late injury, and you need to sell that player instead of the player you were originally planning to sell, then you will be able to do that. Whereas if you'd made an early transfer, and another player in your team picks up a late injury, it might have forced you to take a hit. So those are my top 5 tips to succeed in fantasy football. Let me know in the comments whether you agree or disagree, and if you've got any more top tips then leave them in the comments below as well. Be sure to give the video a like if you've enjoyed it, and subscribe for more preseason content.